So when you guys think of the word service, what comes to mind? And I wrote down a few things, but I want you to just think of the word service. S-E-R-V-I-C-E in the English version. What do you think of? And I'm going to start listing stuff. First, I think of military service. We don't say you fought in the military as much as we say I served or you served in the military. It's a service, mainly because it's not all just fighting. There's a lot of things that our men and women in the armed forces do, that kind of thing. There is doing something for other people. We think of that all the time. The idea of I serve this person, or I serve at my church, or I serve my family, or I go and mow for my parents. I serve them by doing that. I am serving, like it's something I do for other people. There's other ways too. Serve is something that we do when we like bring someone food, like dinner is served. I don't know if there's other ones that you've thought of. I've got a few more that I can say, but for the most part, the word service can mean anything from like a barista handing a $6 coffee to you, to somebody signing up to give their lives, potentially give their lives in service in the military. It can be a word that is used in these like extreme sacrificial way, all the way to like greeting us at the front of a hotel, right? Guest services at a hotel or at an amusement park. So like when we talk about this service, and we think of for other people, service is also a big part of being a Christian. Not just because we go to a church service, another word for it, but serving other people. We've learned the world is a better place when people are serving each other. And it comes somewhat naturally in America. Like we might not realize it. It's kind of in the culture here that when the fires were happening in Hawaii, in Maui, people wanted to know about it. And there were numbers across the bottom of the screens, and there's going to be even more probably concerts, benefit concerts and stuff done for people to give money or people to help rebuild. I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about a guy who started an RV type ministry years ago, where he realized like he wasn't using his RV. It sounded like it was in good shape, but his RV was just parked there, and he decided I can soup this up and give it to or rent it out, or not rent it, but like freely let emergency responders use it. When they go to like a crisis situation, they don't have a place to stay because the crisis, there's not really hotels, or the hotels are for people that are like homeless at that time. So he started this like ministry, this nonprofit, to give them RVs to use. And people started donating RVs, so he's got this whole like parking lot full. It's here in Colorado. And they were interviewing him because they were sending like a boatload of RVs over for emergency workers in Hawaii. Like he was serving. It wasn't something where he was getting something out of this. People were giving their RVs to this ministry, to this nonprofit in order to serve. And nobody was like, but they can't pay you back. Nobody was like, I mean, people were celebrating it. They weren't saying like, well, you're going to lose money on this investment, or do you think that'll really be worth it? No, service is something that we, at least on the outside, celebrate in American culture. There's this idea of sacrificing and giving to other people being a good thing. A lot of the YouTube videos we watch, or the stories that make us cry, are when somebody gave something and they didn't have to. Somebody rescued, or someone gave, or someone provided and they didn't have to. That's serving. And the world is a better place when they're serving, but there is a reason that we don't always serve. A thing called toxic charity. And you might recognize this, that toxic charity happens when we give and the giving actually doesn't help. Or there's another book that's called Help That Doesn't Help, that kind of thing. And what ends up happening is there's kind of this cycle that if we just keep giving freely to someone and they never learn to provide for themselves, it actually hurts them and it hurts us. We see this all the time. We see it in our kids too. We were interacting with a friend's kid the other day, and we saw someone who was unhoused, who was homeless, and the kid just said out loud, well, we can't give them money because they'll spend it on fill in the blank, right? They didn't say fill in the blank. They said the thing that they've probably heard an adult say many times, but there's truth in that we don't really have control over whether or not this will be a great investment when we serve this person. But there's also truth in the idea that the more we give to those who don't have, the more it can create dependency. In his book, Toxic Charity by Bob Lupton, he says, give once and you create appreciation. Give twice and you create anticipation. 3 times, expectation, like how we expect a slide right now. 4 times, you can create entitlement. And 5 times, you create dependency. He was talking a lot about short-term missions and consistently giving. The easiest way to put it, a friend of mine told this story years ago, that if every week, or if this week, I went over to my neighbor, I just walked across the street, didn't say a thing, knocked on the door, neighbor comes to the door, if they come into the door, and I just hand them $5. Right at 5 o'clock on Sunday, $5. They would be probably the response would be, thank you, or what is this for? Do I owe you something? No, it's just a gift. Then I leave, no explanation. If I came back the next Sunday, 5 o'clock on Sunday, and I gave $5, they might have more to say, they might have less to say. If I did that for a week, they'd probably get to a place where they were realizing hey, I get to go get, a drink every Sunday with this money that Jared's giving me. Or they'd start to go, I can use this, I can save up, this can be something that I save for vacation. There'd start to be this expectancy. Thankfulness also, hey Jared, thanks so much every time I come over, month after month, week after week, giving him $5 at 5 o'clock. No reason, just serving, just giving out of my own vast desire to do that, right? This is a random story, but here's the point. Months and months later, if I came over there, the neighbor would probably be ready. Maybe even have the hand out. And you know what often happens is maybe that neighbor would have certain things in place, budgeting for that gift, that $5. And if all of a sudden it didn't come over, that neighbor might be a little upset and say, hey, what happened to my $5? What started as something that was just a kindness of maybe someone's heart, of your heart, can turn into something that becomes dependency that hurts us. That's one of the main reasons that we don't serve the way that we often want to or know that we can, is because there are hurtful things that can happen when we serve. Reading Psalm 123, we see a picture of what it means to be a servant of God. And we just finished our series Legendary, where we looked at the life of Jesus. Here's the main perspective today. First one, Jesus served those around him second, but he served the Father first. Jesus served others second and served the Father first. As followers of Jesus, we're called to serve. We're called to give. We're called to take up our cross and follow Jesus, to give our lives as a ransom for other people. And the practice of giving and serving, like I said, in America, is something that is very, celebrated. There's actually 1.5 million registered nonprofits in the United States last year. And give that perspective, there are 10 million in the entire world. So we have over 10% of the nonprofits just in our country, the United States alone. And nonprofits, in case you didn't put this together, are not supported by profits, they're supported by donations. People giving to those organizations, saying, I don't receive anything from you for this, but I love what you are doing, so I'm going to give freely to this nonprofit. Nonprofits, you could say, are serving, but no, they are receiving a profit from, or wages or whatever from their donors, but their donors are serving them by giving. And you might give to something right now. Jesus modeled being a servant to others. He taught it, he commanded us to love our neighbors as ourselves, but he always put the perspective in order. And this is really important. Jesus says, and Mark records it in chapter 12, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Love God. Like fully love God. And the second is this. Love your neighbor, people, as yourself. And then he says this, there is no commandment greater than these. So he says these, meaning there are two commandments here. There is love the Lord your God, serve the Lord your God with all that you have, all that you are. And the second, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's a weird thing to think about, loving our neighbor as ourselves, because there is no one that I give more to than myself. And that's simply for survival sometimes. Like, I am not thinking about others' needs the way that I'm thinking about mine. That's why I have my water here for my needs. That's why I have my clothing. And the times that I got these, I was thinking about that would be a great shirt for me. I wasn't thinking, there's probably somebody out there that needs this shirt more than me when I was in the store, or when I was, let's be honest, when I was on a tablet looking at something online, or a sale, or when somebody bought these for me or something like that. We think about our needs pretty well. Jesus doesn't say don't think about yourself, forsake yourself here. There is self-sacrifice. But love your neighbor as yourself. And if I don't love myself, I can't love my neighbor. I think we can put that together. If I am hateful towards myself, like, I'm going to treat my neighbor the same way. I'm going to treat other people the same way. So there is a bit of a hierarchy here. That there's love the Lord your God with all that you are, serve God first. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. So in the same way, he's saying you've got to love yourself, but love your neighbor the same way. That if you love having a meal, love that your neighbor would have a meal too. Celebrate this in your life, celebrate this in others. Give to yourself, give to others. In Psalm 123, verse 1, it says, I lift my eyes up to you who sit enthroned heaven. That's verse 1. To you who sit enthroned in heaven. See, serving down to people that we see as below us can make us feel really good, make us feel powerful. I'm so thankful that I have so much to offer this person, these people. Serving sideways is kind of like networking. I'm going to help out a family member. I'm going to help out a neighbor. I'm going to help out somebody who's close to me. Maybe someone who is able to serve me back. There might be some expectations, some networking expectation, but serving upward, serving someone who is above us is a little difficult because it causes us to have to humble ourselves. Think about it. If your boss is making more money than you, if your boss has got more things than you or a nicer car than you, and your boss says, hey, will you come help me move? It feels a little different than if someone who makes the same amount of money at work asked you, can you come help me move? Or I'm sick, would you cover for me? Versus someone who has more than us. It changes our minds a little bit when we have to serve upwards. What the psalm writer is saying here, I lift my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven, is just the first part of saying God is separated from us. This is not a peer relationship. As intimate as that relationship is with God, as much as we need to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and as much as God is here with us, we are not on the same level as the creator of the universe. And that might not be like there's no chuckles in the room. There's no like what right now? Because for the most part, we like to think of God as like our buddy. We like to think of God as someone who, because he understands, because he knows, because he sees, that he's right there. But we have to remember, and the psalm writer is reminding us, that there's a separateness between mortals and the immortal. That God doesn't need us, but God chooses to love us. That we are in need of God, and the idea of God sitting on his throne and caring what we have to say is something that he chooses to do and not something he has to do. Our priorities must be in order. That when we look at serving, we serve God first, and we serve ourselves and others second. Now, verse 2, the writer uses an illustration or an allegory that just didn't age well. And this is the part where, as a Bible scholar, as someone who has some education in reading the Bible, these are the parts that over the years, without a doubt, people love to use translations of the Bible, or they skip over this stuff to avoid the really awkward moments. Let me read it, and maybe you'll pick up. Okay, this is the NIV translation. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave look to the hand of their mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. Do you see the awkward part? That slavery is brought up. And like I said, most places you go, church-wise, what we tend to do is we tend to just go to the next page. You know what? There's a lot of songs. Let's talk about some that don't talk about slavery. Especially in in your first read, seems almost like support of it. All right? Which we'll talk about in a second. And as a pastor, I want to tell you that we have to make 4 decisions here. 4 things that we have to do to be a church that is not only faithful to the Word of God, but also faithful to what has happened. Especially if you're an American, there's 2 things we think about, or we should think about when slavery comes up. And there might be more, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but these are the 2 major ones that need to come to our minds. First of all, in the 16th century, when in America there was legalized chattel slavery. Chattel meaning people were treated as property, and it was completely legal. And it was based primarily on race. It wasn't at first, and there's a lot of readings you can do about how slavery has been around since human beings were able to do that. There's been a type of slavery in every culture. Not an excuse, just part of it. But 16th century America, one of the reasons that was such a vile thing was because we had this document we signed that said that all men were created equal. And yet we were not treating all people as equal. We were treating people based on race primarily as property. And that is vile, and that is against everything that Jesus stood for. And the more that's why it's so important to read the Bible. Because there are places like what we're at today in Psalm 123 that in that time period that there were slave traders, slave owners, and even people that worked in churches that owned slaves that would use verses, cherry picking to support slavery and convince slaves this is actually what God has for you. This is what you deserve, or what you get, or this is what I deserve, what I get to have. It was vile, it was horrible, and it's not the way of Jesus. Number 2, another modern form of slavery today is called human trafficking. And a lot of people in the established world would say that slavery was abolished, we don't have slave ships anymore, we don't have this, but that actually, if you look at stats, it's called forced labor today. Forced labor occurs when individuals are compelled against their will to provide work or service through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. This crime happens both in the United States and overseas. The International Labor Organization estimates that 24.9 million people were in forced labor as of 2016. Now, think about that, 24.9 people, right? I don't know what town you grew up in, but you probably didn't grow up in a town that large. So think of the town you lived in. How many of the town or the city that you lived in would have to be stacked and multiplied to equal 24.9 people? That's a lot of human beings made in the image of God, not treated as if God made them. That should make us upset and, I almost said upset and angry. It should sadden us, and it should make us rise to action. A lot of people are not loving their neighbor as themselves. They are not loving their neighbor as themselves. They are forcing other people to live outside of who God created them to be. So here's the 4 things we have to do. And this might feel like, gosh, you might even feel this now, like, why do I have to talk about this? Because I believe that the Bible has a reason for existing. And I actually believe that we can say slavery is horrible and question why this writer felt a need to use it, but also say, is there any redeeming value in here? Here's the 4 things we need to do. First of all, as a Christian, we should not ignore it. Don't ignore it. Don't just skip to the next page. Don't not ask the questions. Don't not look at this for what it is. Second, we have to address it. Sometimes we can just say, all right, we're not ignoring it, now what? But we need to address it, like we're doing now. We need to be honest about how awkward this is and how this doesn't change God's view of slavery, as we'll look at in a second. Third, we need to dig into the history and look into why it is that slavery was mentioned here and what slavery actually meant then. And fourth, and this is the most important, we need to ask ourselves, what is the point and purpose of this illustration? And is it worth keeping, even though a very vile act and part of our history was used to illustrate it? So here's what slavery was back then. This is based upon historians. This is based upon different scriptural readings as well. But actually, racism didn't play as big of a part in slavery back then. That actually it was a lot more economical. There was this thing called a caste system, which there are caste systems today. Where I live and where many of you guys live, because we live in the same kind of area, caste systems are more indirect. They're more like worship of celebrities or worship of people in power that's kind of chosen. But caste systems that are direct still exist today. The reason they're not talked about on the news is because we want to be nice to other nations and not offend them, because their culture matters and we want to respect that kind of thing. But the caste system is a way of saying there is a hierarchy and you fit into some sort of place in that hierarchy. The highest have the most privilege and the most power. How do you get privilege and power? It often has to do with financial stability and financial wealth, having that. But it also has other things that come along with it. But they usually go down to today's day and age. It comes down to financial power, financial privilege that you were born into. You don't get to move within an established caste system. No matter what you do, you are set there, and it is what you deserve. That is what's said in the caste systems. But for those that are the lowest, the least and the lowest, they have nothing they can do to move up, except in that day and age, what was above the least, the last, and the lost was to be a slave or an indentured servant for somebody who was higher up. So if I wanted to, I wasn't quite like equal with them if I was their servant, but it at least moved me up from where I was. At least I wasn't living in the same place. At least I wasn't eating the same thing I was before. At least I was able to live a life of forced or indentured servanthood. It's still vile. It's still not treating people like more than property. But it is a little different. Slavery was a common way for you to pay off a family debt. I have nothing left. I have nothing that I can do to pay off this debt other than my work or my labor or my life, my time. And I'm going to be honest with you. Today, I have complaints about my life. Like, it is most every day there's something where I go, I wish I had more of this. I wish I had less of this. I wish I was able to do this more, or I wish I could do this less. Like, there's some sort of like complaint, whether it's right before bed or whether it's as I'm dealing with a difficult situation with people or with circumstances or work or finances. Like, there are moments where I go, I don't love this about my life, or I wish this was different. But I've never in my life thought the only way to get out of this is if I can just become a slave to someone else. Never have I been in a situation like that, and I would guess that many of you here haven't. But that's the reality of forced labor today, of this is an opportunity for me to get out of the life that I feel so stuck in. And so in many ways, people in slavery then had chosen it. That it was not that slave traders came and took their village and they became slaves, but that they went, this is an opportunity for me. Was it a fair system that they were part of? No. I don't think that this author is saying that that system was good. But it's saying that slavery and that relationship to the master are similar to where God could be treating us if God wanted to. That we said God sits up on a throne in heaven above us. And actually there's nothing that would say in Scripture that God is in the clouds like a lot of our Greek mythology. But to say God is above us simply means like their understanding of a caste system. That God is the powerful, God is the privileged, and yet he hears us. And yet he cares about our prayers. Jesus stood up for women in an extremely patriarchal society. Jesus stood for the poor in a culturally and religiously supported caste system. Jesus stood up for children at a time when children were considered not just property, but useless property. Of why are they even around? Jesus stood up against the powerful when the power that they had was being used to hold down the oppressed and the weak. And Jesus stood up for the sick and the physically disabled when society had said, you are the lowest of the low. We don't want to see you. We're actually going to have you leave our city so we don't have to see you. When I research the subject of slavery in the Bible, what I do is I look at what is the common stream. Does the Bible talk about slavery the same way through, or are there certain parts where they kind of add things, that kind of do things a little different? One of the most common things you'll hear about the Bible and slavery from a skeptic, and maybe it's a good question to ask, is why doesn't the Bible have, like in the Ten Commandments, something really clear that says, don't have slaves, or slavery is wrong. Like that's what I want, and that's what skeptics want. And you'll hear some really big skeptics. That's kind of like the card to play. That's the ace in their sleeve. It's like, well, we can talk all day about your historical differences, but why doesn't God just put a verse in there that says, don't do slavery? The silence argument can be a powerful one, unless you look at the entire flow of Scripture. So we start in the Old Testament law, Exodus 21:16. Moses is writing the law to the people, and what the Exodus 21:16 says is that the way that slave traders and kidnappers should be treated when they are caught, slave traders and kidnappers, is to be put to death. Which is pretty extreme. If we had a piano, we'd hit all those like low keys right now, dun dun, right? Like we put to death. Like that's a very serious thing. Like God is not in support of, the law of Moses is not in support of people who are kidnapping or trading slaves, trading people like property. We skip to Psalms several books later, at a different time in history. Psalm 82 verse 3 says, give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. I love it. It says, maintain the right, or the rights of the afflicted. Those who are being persecuted, those who have nothing, maintain the rights that they have. In a system that says they have no rights, you know they do. Maintain those. The prophets, Isaiah said pretty much the same thing. Usually when the prophets say something, it's because people weren't doing it. And the prophet had to go in and be like, you guys stink. Let me tell you this again, but maybe shout it. It says, learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless again. Plead the widow's cause. Again, the prophets say, learn to do good. And when you have to learn something, it doesn't mean that you're being reminded. It means you don't know how to do this. Learn to do good. Learn to lift up those who don't have bootstraps to pull themselves up from. We talked about what Jesus said in the Gospels. And then the letters later on in 1 Timothy 1:10, a total repeat of what was said in Exodus. In the list of these worst sins, all these immorality and different things like that, murder, all these things, puts slave trading. Because the writer of 1 Timothy saw that slave trade was occurring and said, those that follow Jesus will do different. Those that follow Jesus will not make their income, will not make their livelihood by treating people as property. So slavery in this particular moment is just an allegory. Slavery in the servitude form existed in that time period, and the author used it to explain this idea of God loving us is like someone who owns another person, treating them with love and care and grace. That this person is lower, this person has no cultural right to be treated as an equal. But this master says to them, I see you, and you can ask for mercy. Perspective number 2. We are all enslaved to some type of master. And this is kind of when it gets a little personal here, because the first part, it's kind of we just did this educational thing, but really what's happening here is this allegory. We like to be in control of our lives. But the reality is, if we look at our lives, we can all sit down right now. I can have the greatest coaches on finances and on calendars and scheduling and everything, and we can put every minute of our week purposeful, something that needs to happen. We can schedule out your perfect week. All the things you didn't want to do last week, we're not putting in the schedule this week. We can take coaching lessons, we can do all the trainings, everything. But somehow as the week goes on, we find ourselves caught in the same cycle that we did the week before. Cycles that can be broken, but man, they're strong. I can plan to read my Bible every single day. I can plan to look at certain things and not look at other certain things. I can plan to spend money this way and not this way. But the week goes on, and the same masters that whispered in my ear and that coaxed me one way the week before are speaking again this week. We all have some master in our lives that is pulling us and moving us in a certain way. And I think the easiest way to talk about this and see it is addiction. And there's addictions, especially in America, that we put at the very top of addictions. And they're usually substances that cause us to lose control of ourselves. They would master us. That we no longer have control. That we used to think it's just about self-control. Hey, come on, it's self-control. Just don't do that. But then we learn more about mental health, and we learn more about addiction. We realize, no, that has taken over their body and their mind. That for them to break this, actually, they have to go through a weaning off of this master in their life. But there are other slaves that we have, and those slaves are often things that are very culturally acceptable. That if we look at our weeks, the things that are culturally acceptable that we do, that at the end of it we go, why am I doing this? Are the real masters in our life. Because the most powerful threat to our lives is not the things that are called evil, but the things that are called neutral. Or even the things that are called good, but they're not called best. I love having friends, but if it's destroying my marriage or destroying my job or my physical health, I need to reevaluate how good that really is or those habits really are. That I think it's really easy right now if we all said, hey, there's some addiction classes, and this is going to really help us have control in our lives. We all would have someone we could sign up for that. Oh, I have a brother that needs that. I'm going to sign him up. I'll pay for it, But nobody wants to sign themselves up. Nobody wants to say, I have been trying it my own way for a long time, and I really don't have the control of my life that I'd like to say that I have. At the heart of it, a skeptic always asks, why do I need Jesus to be my master? Why do I have to give my life to Jesus? Why do I have to give my life to God? Why do I have to be, in this case, I hate using the word, but this is what the author is using. Why do I have to be a slave to God, to serve God? And here's the reality. Because there will always be some master over us, unless it's a master that destroys the things that are destroying us. Everybody loves to wear screen tees to the gym because nobody really wants to talk to each other at the gym, so they wear like the conversation on their shirt. And I was so inspired the other day. I was thinking about this sermon, and it's a couple weeks ago. And the guy had this shirt on, and on the back it said, "Destroy the things that destroy you." And I don't know if it had any sort of religious connection at all to it. But isn't that like the hardest thing to do? It's so hard because the things that are often destroying us are not things that are illegal. They're things that are just destroying us slowly from the person we want to be. And we say it's going to be different next week. But we're just going right back to that same master. Unless that master is Jesus. Perspective number 3, and then we'll finish. We can expect mercy from God. Have mercy on us, Lord. Have mercy on us. For we have endured no end of contempt. We have endured no end of ridicule from the arrogant, or contempt from the proud. From those above us, from those beside us, we've been persecuted, we've been ridiculed. Have mercy on us, God. Now, the author's not saying, God, you've been horrible to us. Have mercy on us. Often we think like mercy, like when you wrestle with your dad maybe, or like siblings, and like the mercy rule in baseball, right? If there are way too many runs, like the mercy rule, the game just ends, right? Then you don't even go all the innings, that kind of thing, or the whole match, that kind of thing. Like mercy is like tapping out. It's like saying, okay, we're done. We'll give you mercy for what I'm doing. But in this case, the mercy is much more like a prayer, saying, God, like there's a lot of stuff happening in my life that is not good. Can you step off your throne and give me mercy? And that wouldn't work in a slave-master relationship. That wouldn't work hardly in a boss relationship. If you know your boss is a mean, cruel, greedy boss, you're not asking for a raise, you're looking for another job, right? Totally different. What we can expect from our God. What we can expect from our God is mercy. We can expect kindness. And that's why I think that the caste system and understanding slavery is so important for understanding all the words that are written, especially in the Old Testament, about God's love for us. Because I was born believing that God loved me. That there's never been a moment in my life that when God was mentioned that I didn't think God loved me. And in that same way, there was never a time that I thought that I didn't deserve God's love. Never a time that I thought, like, this is something that is such a privilege. When you understand the caste system that people were living in then, you understand why grace was such a powerful thing. Because grace is a gift undeserved. Grace is a gift. Nothing was earned and nothing could be earned. Because in the caste system, especially in that day and age, if somebody who had something saw someone who didn't, they wouldn't say, I should give them something. They would say, they have what they deserve. And the person who it doesn't have wouldn't say, they should give me something to help me out. They would say, I have what I deserve. And this is why when grace busts on the scene, and when grace is mentioned by Jesus, by Paul, by any of the apostles, and even by the prophets before that, grace is such an out of the ordinary, interrupting idea. Because it doesn't make sense. And I can talk about it all day and I can read more verses, but I think that actually the more we lean into the arts of the last 100 years, we see the way that we have tried it, artists have tried and even succeeded in explaining grace. And one of them is a musical a show called Les Miserables. I used to pronounce that way wrong, and maybe I still do. But Jean Valjean is a criminal, has escaped from prison, has always been trying to do the right thing, and there's some really great ethical discussions in this production. One of the least popular versions of this depictions has been the movie that didn't have any singing, but just the story. But this most powerful scene is when Jean Valjean is out on the street and he's looking for a place to stay. And of course, the Christian, the priest, lets him stay in their abbey. And you'll see it in this depiction here. Jean Valjean has so much bitterness in his heart, has so much anger, has so much fear still in him, that while he's there, instead of receiving that gift that the priest gives him, he robs the priest. He goes and he's stealing the silverware that's made of actual silver. And you'll see what happens here. God is not some patrolling officer looking for us to make some sort of misstep. God is not some security guard or some strict parent just watching us and waiting for us to blow it. And he's also not some disconnected, who cares about you? What have you done for me lately, boss? But that God is actually a master who wants more for us than we could ever do without him.